Most people think an empath leaves because of one dramatic betrayal, one explosive argument, one unforgivable lie, one moment so obvious that anyone could point to it and say, "That's why they walked away." But that's almost never how it happens. The truth is far more subtle, far more psychological. And if you don't understand this, you'll completely miss the moment you lost them. An empath doesn't disappear because of one storm. They disappear because of the slow erosion that happens over time, the tiny fractures, the repeated moments when their trust was tested and quietly damaged, the conversations where they felt unheard, the promises that were made casually and broken just as casually, the subtle dismissals, the emotional inconsistency, the way their presence was expected but their needs were overlooked. To most people, these moments seem insignificant, but to an empath, nothing is insignificant. They notice the shift in your tone when you're pretending everything is fine. They feel the hesitation behind your words when your intentions no longer match your actions. They catch the energy behind what isn't being said. And every single one of these moments gets stored away not out of resentment but out of awareness. That's what people misunderstand about empaths. They are not keeping score. They are collecting evidence, and there's a difference. Keeping score is about revenge. It's about waiting for the chance to strike back. Collecting evidence is about clarity. An empath is constantly scanning for truth. They are trying to understand whether what they're feeling is real, whether the disconnection they sense is temporary, or whether it reveals something deeper about the relationship itself. At first, they will give you grace. They'll tell themselves you're stressed, distracted, going through something difficult. Then they'll try to communicate. They'll explain what they're feeling, often with more patience than most people deserve. They'll offer understanding. They'll create opportunities for repair. And this is where most people make the mistake that costs them everything. They mistake that patience for tolerance. They assume that because the empath keeps showing up, the damage isn't real. Because there wasn't a dramatic confrontation, they believe there's no real consequence. But every ignored concern, every repeated pattern, every moment of emotional carelessness adds another layer of distance. Quietly, silently. Until one day, something shifts. And what makes this so dangerous is that from the outside, it may look like nothing happened. No fight, no ultimatum, no warning. Just a calmness that feels unfamiliar. That calmness is not peace between you. It is peace they have made within themselves. It means the internal battle is over. The hoping, the waiting, the rationalizing, it's finished. By the time an empath reaches this point, they are no longer deciding whether to leave. They already have, because they were never broken by one massive betrayal. They were simply exhausted by 1,000 small violations. And once that realization settles in, they don't make noise. They disappear. If you really want to know the exact moment a connection with an empath begins to die, it's not when they get angry. It's not when they cry. It's not even when they confront you. Those moments still carry emotional investment. They still reveal hope. They still show that somewhere deep down they believe the relationship is worth saving. The real turning point comes when they stop explaining. That's the moment most people completely misunderstand. When an empath falls silent, people often assume they've finally calmed down, that the issue has passed, that whatever tension existed has somehow resolved itself. But silence from an empath is rarely peace. It is often surrender. Because empaths are natural communicators when something matters to them. They don't enjoy disconnection. They don't thrive in emotional distance. Their instinct is to repair, to clarify, to bridge the gap between misunderstanding and understanding. When something feels off, they will try. They will ask the difficult questions. They will explain how your actions affected them. They will search for the right words even when those words are hard to say. And they do this not because they're needy, not because they're dramatic, but because they care enough to fight for the connection. That's what people fail to recognize. Every conversation an empath initiates about a problem is an act of hope. It is them saying, "This matters enough for me to try." So when they keep bringing something up, when they keep trying to explain what they feel, they are not attacking you. They are inviting you to understand them. They are handing you an opportunity to strengthen the bond. And if that invitation is repeatedly dismissed, if their concerns are minimized, if their honesty is met with defensiveness, if their vulnerability is treated like inconvenience, something begins to change. At first, they'll try harder. They'll rephrase. They'll become more patient. They'll search for better ways to make themselves understood. But every failed attempt chips away at something essential, not their feelings. Their belief that being understood is possible. And once that belief starts to die, their words begin to disappear with it. The questions stop. The explanations become shorter. The emotional depth fades. Where there was once effort, there is now restraint. And this is the part people miss. They interpret this silence as improvement. They think finally the drama is over. But what they're witnessing isn't resolution. It's emotional withdrawal. The empath has realized that speaking no longer creates connection, it only creates exhaustion. And so they conserve their energy. They stop explaining because they understand a painful truth. You can't force understanding on someone committed to misunderstanding you. By the time an empath becomes truly quiet, they have already replayed every conversation in their mind. They have already questioned themselves, already wondered if they asked for too much, already given the benefit of the doubt more times than you'll ever know. And when they finally stop speaking, it's because they've reached a conclusion. Not that they no longer care, but that caring alone cannot sustain a connection. That silence you hear is not emptiness. It is the sound of someone emotionally letting go. And once an empath reaches the point where they no longer feel the need to explain themselves, the connection is already slipping beyond repair. Because the most dangerous silence is the one that arrives after they've said everything they had to say, and you still refuse to hear it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that kindness has no limits. They see an empath's patience, their willingness to forgive, their ability to understand pain, even pain they didn't cause, and they misread it completely. They call it softness. They call it weakness. They convince themselves that because an empath doesn't react with immediate anger, because they don't explode at every offense, because they continue showing grace even after being disappointed, they must be someone who can be pushed indefinitely. And that assumption is where everything begins to fall apart. Because what looks like tolerance is often discipline. What looks like softness is often restraint. And what looks like endless forgiveness is usually a conscious choice to see the best in people, even when the evidence is starting to suggest otherwise. Empaths understand human flaws deeply. They know people make mistakes. They know fear makes people selfish, insecurity makes people defensive, and unresolved pain often causes people to hurt others without fully realizing it. That understanding is what makes them compassionate, but it is also what makes them vulnerable to being underestimated. Some people begin to test the boundaries. Not all at once. It starts subtly. A small act of disrespect here, a broken promise there, a moment of emotional carelessness, then another, and another. Each time the empath responds with understanding. They listen, they forgive, they give room for growth. And instead of appreciating that grace, some people interpret it as permission. Permission to keep crossing lines. Permission to keep taking more than they give. Permission to believe there will always be another chance. This is where they make the fatal miscalculation. Because empathy does not mean the absence of boundaries. It means the boundaries are often invisible until they are crossed one too many times. An empath rarely announces the exact moment they've had enough. There is no dramatic warning, no desperate demand, no final emotional outburst. What happens is far more unsettling. They simply shift. The warmth becomes distance. The openness becomes reserve. The emotional access you once had begins to disappear. And by the time most people notice it, it's already too late. Because an empath's breaking point doesn't look like chaos. It looks like clarity. It is the moment they fully recognize that their compassion has been mistaken for weakness, that their patience has been exploited rather than respected, that the emotional energy they poured into preserving the connection has become a resource others feel entitled to consume. And once they see that clearly, something changes permanently. The same person who once fought to understand you will stop trying. The same person who once searched for reasons to stay will quietly begin creating distance. Not because they suddenly stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves enough to stop accepting what drains them. That's the part many people never understand. When an empath walks away, it is not an act of revenge. It is an act of self-respect. They are not trying to teach you a lesson. They are responding to one they have already learned. The lesson that no amount of compassion can heal a connection built on imbalance. And once that lesson becomes undeniable, they stop offering access to the parts of themselves you failed to value. Because the moment an empath realizes their kindness has been treated like weakness is the exact moment their quiet exit begins. And when that shift happens, there is rarely a way back. By the time you notice their absence, they've already reclaimed everything you took for granted. There is something people often underestimate about an empath. It's not just their ability to feel deeply. It's their ability to see clearly. Most people think empathy is simply emotional sensitivity, the capacity to care, to understand, to connect. But real empathy is far more precise than that. It is pattern recognition at the deepest human level. An empath notices what most people overlook. They notice the slight delay before you answer a direct question. They notice when your words say one thing, but your energy communicates something entirely different. They notice the inconsistencies between what you promise and what you repeatedly deliver. And at first, they don't judge these things. They observe them. They process them. They try to make sense of them. This is why empaths often stay longer than people expect, not because they're blind, but because they're trying to understand. They'll study the contradiction. They'll search for context. They'll ask themselves if they're misreading the situation, if perhaps there's another explanation. If stress or fear or circumstance is influencing behavior that doesn't reflect who you truly are. That is the grace an empath gives, the willingness to look deeper before drawing conclusions. But that grace has limits, because patterns, when repeated enough times, become impossible to explain away. One missed promise can be forgiven. 2 can be rationalized. 3 can be questioned. But eventually, repetition creates revelation. And that is the moment everything changes. Because once an empath sees the pattern for what it is, they cannot unsee it. Once they recognize that the apology is always followed by the same behavior, once they notice that the affection appears only when convenient, once they realize that the moments of connection are being used to mask cycles of neglect, manipulation, or emotional inconsistency, the illusion breaks. And when that illusion breaks, so does the emotional bond that kept them holding on. This is what makes an empath's departure so final. They are not leaving because of a temporary feeling. They are leaving because clarity has replaced confusion. Before clarity, there is hope. Hope says maybe things will change. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe this time will be different. But clarity ends negotiation. Clarity removes the need for endless internal debate. It answers the questions they spent so long asking themselves. And once they have that answer, they no longer need closure from you. That's the part people struggle to understand. They think if they can just explain enough, apologize enough, promise enough, they can restore what was lost. But by the time an empath has fully seen the pattern, words have lost their power. Because they are no longer listening to what you say. They are trusting what you consistently do. And behavior always tells the truth, eventually. An empath may forgive what happened. They may even wish you well. But forgiveness does not erase recognition. Once they have seen the truth of who you are through repeated action, there is no returning to the version of you they once believed in. That version no longer exists. It was replaced by evidence. And evidence is difficult to argue with. This is why their exit often feels so sudden to the people left behind. It wasn't sudden. It was simply invisible. The realization had been building quietly beneath the surface for longer than anyone knew. And when the final piece fell into place, they didn't need another conversation. They didn't need another explanation. They only needed distance. Because once an empath sees your true pattern, they stop waiting for potential, and they start responding to reality. When an empath disappears, most people misunderstand why. They assume it's retaliation. They think it's a tactic meant to create guilt, to provoke regret, to force some dramatic realization. They expect the silence to be temporary. They tell themselves the empath is waiting for an apology, hoping for a reaction, trying to make a point. But that assumption reveals a complete misunderstanding of how empaths leave. Because when an empath truly walks away, it is rarely about punishment. It is about protection. And there is a profound difference between the two. Punishment is focused outward. It is designed to make someone else feel the consequences of their actions. Protection is focused inward. It is the decision to preserve what remains of your own peace. An empath does not disappear because they suddenly stopped caring. That would be easier. The truth is far more difficult. They often leave while they still care deeply. They leave while part of them still hope things could have been different. They leave while memories still hold emotional weight. But they also understand something many people never learn. Caring about someone is not enough to justify staying where your spirit is being slowly depleted. This realization doesn't arrive overnight. It comes after internal battles no one else ever sees. The empath replays every conversation, questions every decision, re-examines every moment for signs they might have misunderstood. They search themselves relentlessly, wondering if they asked for too much, expected too much, felt too deeply. They carry the burden of trying to make sense of what broke. And because they are naturally wired toward understanding, they will often exhaust every possible explanation before accepting the truth. But eventually, they reach a point where the emotional math becomes undeniable. The cost of staying becomes greater than the pain of leaving. And when that moment arrives, something inside them settles. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with certainty. It is a quiet, almost invisible shift. The need for one more conversation disappears. The need to be understood fades. The need for closure dissolves. Because they finally understand that closure is not something another person gives you. It is something you create by choosing yourself. This is why an empath's final departure is often so silent. There's no dramatic announcement, no long explanation, no final attempt to make you see what you refused to see before. They simply withdraw, emotionally first, then mentally. then physically, if necessary. And to the outside world, it can look almost effortless, as if they just woke up one day and decided not to care. But what you are witnessing is not sudden detachment. It is the final stage of a process that took far longer than anyone realizes. A process of grieving while still present, of slowly releasing attachment while still showing up, of making peace with the loss before the actual departure ever happens. By the time they leave, they have already mourned what the connection could have been. That is why they rarely come back, not because they are cold, not because they are unforgiving, but because returning would mean abandoning the peace they fought so hard to rebuild. And once an empath rediscovers what it feels like to live without constant emotional depletion, they will protect that peace with everything they have. So if an empath quietly disappears from your life, understand this. They are not trying to make you suffer. They are choosing not to suffer anymore. And when that choice is finally made, their silence says everything words no longer need to explain. Some exits are not meant to hurt you. They are meant to heal them.